Tonight's story is for anyone whose mind doesn't easily slow down. For those quiet nights when thoughts keep circling and questions don't seem to settle. So for the next little while, you don't need to solve anything. You don't need to figure anything out. Just let this story carry you gently, like a slow walk through a quiet town, where nothing needs to be answered and everything is allowed to rest. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. There are places in the world that do not ask anything from you. Not your plans, not your worries, not even your thoughts. They simply exist, quietly, steadily, as if they understand that sometimes a person just needs somewhere to be. This story begins in one of those places. A small town, not marked clearly on most maps. Not forgotten, just not hurried toward. A place where nothing needed to be solved. And that was exactly why people stayed. The morning arrived there the way it often did, without announcement. No sudden brightness, no rush of sound, just a slow unfolding of light across rooftops. The sky a soft pale blue, as if it too had just woken up and wasn't quite ready to begin. The streets were still, not empty, just resting. A faint mist lingered near the ground, clinging gently to the edges of fences and sidewalks. And if you listened closely, you might hear it. Not silence exactly, but something softer than that. The sound of a place that had not yet decided what kind of day it would be. At the corner of Maple and 3rd, there stood a bench, nothing remarkable about it. Wooden slats slightly worn, paint faded just enough to suggest it had seen many seasons. And yet, it was the kind of bench people noticed, not because it called attention, but because it didn't. It simply waited, the way some places do, as if it understood that eventually someone would need it. Across the street, a small bakery had already begun its morning work. The windows softly fogged, the warm scent of bread drifting into the cool air. Not strong enough to demand attention, just enough to be found. If you happened to be passing by, inside, Mrs. Callahan moved slowly between the counters. Not because she was tired, but because there was no reason to rush. She placed each tray with care, each movement measured, as if even the smallest task deserved its time. And perhaps it did. At the far end of the street, the library stood quietly, its door still closed, its windows reflecting the pale morning light. Inside, books rested on their shelves, stories waiting, not impatient, just present. And somewhere in the town, a clock ticked, not loudly, not insistently, just enough to remind anyone listening. That time was moving, even here, even slowly, and yet there was something different about this place. Something you might not notice right away, but you would feel it after a while. The way the air did not press against you, the way thoughts seemed to soften, as if they no longer needed to be held so tightly. At the bench, a man arrived, not hurried, not lost, just walking. He paused for a moment before sitting, not out of hesitation, but as if acknowledging the space, then lowered himself gently onto the wood, resting his hands on his knees, looking out at nothing in particular. And for a while, he did nothing at all. No phone, no book, no attempt to fill the moment. He simply sat, and something shifted, not around him, but within. The kind of shift that is almost too small to notice, but too real to ignore. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan glanced out the window. She saw him there, sitting still, and she smiled. Not because she knew him, but because she understood. It happens here sometimes. People arrive with something on their minds, something unfinished, something unresolved, and after a while, they stop trying to solve it, not because they give up, but because they no longer need to. The town had a way of doing that, not fixing things, not answering questions, but easing them, like a knot loosening on its own. And as the morning continued to unfold, more small movements began. A door opened somewhere, footsteps on gravel, the soft sound of a bicycle passing slowly down the street. Nothing urgent, nothing pulling at the day, just life unfolding at its own pace. The man on the bench leaned back slightly, taking a slow breath, as if, for the first time that morning, he had remembered how, and in that breath, there was no urgency, no pressure, no need to figure anything out. Just air, just stillness, just enough. And if you had been there, walking quietly through that street, you might have felt it too, that gentle realization that not everything needs an answer, not everything needs to be solved. Some things simply need space, and in this town, space was something you were always given, freely, without question, without expectation. The clock continued its soft ticking. The bakery door opened, then closed again. The mist began to lift slowly, and the day, without ever announcing itself, had begun. There is a certain kind of morning, the kind that does not ask you to wake up fully. It lets you arrive slowly, as if the day itself understands that some thoughts need time to settle before anything else can begin. That was the kind of morning this town preferred. Not bright, not demanding, just patient. The man on the bench remained there a while longer, not because he had nowhere to go, but because there was nowhere he needed to be just yet. The difference is small, but here it mattered. A breeze moved softly through the street, just enough to stir the leaves, not enough to interrupt anything. And as it passed, it carried something with it. Not a sound exactly, more like the memory of one. At the bakery door, a small bell rang gently. A woman stepped out, holding a paper bag close to her chest. She paused for a moment, taking in the air, then glanced toward the bench. The man did not look at her, but she smiled anyway. People did that here sometimes, smiled without needing a reason. As if the act itself was enough, she walked on, her footsteps soft against the pavement. Not rushed, never rushed. Across the street, the library door opened at last. Miss Clara stepped out onto the small front stoop, a set of keys still in her hand. She stood there for a moment, not moving further, just listening, not for anything in particular, but for the shape of the morning. It had a feeling today, not unusual, just noticeable. Inside the library, the air still carried the faint scent of paper and polish. Books lined neatly, stories waiting, always waiting, but never impatient. Miss Clara turned the sign to open, though no one had yet arrived, and somehow that felt right. At the far end of Maple Street, a man named Mr. Leland stepped out of his house. He adjusted his coat, not because it was cold, but because it was something to do. He paused at the edge of his walkway, looking down the street, not searching, just noticing. He had lived in this town long enough to understand something most people missed, that not every moment was meant to lead somewhere. Some were meant to stay exactly where they were, and this morning seemed to be one of those. The clock, somewhere unseen, continued its quiet rhythm, tick, 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 not counting something down, not pushing anything forward, just marking. At the bench, the man shifted slightly. He rested his elbows on his knees. Looking down at his hands, there was something there. Not physically, but something held, a thought perhaps, or a question that had followed him longer than he cared to admit. And yet, here, it did not press as hard. It sat more gently, as if it too had grown tired of being carried. Across from him, Mrs. Callahan stepped outside the bakery. She wiped her hands on her apron slowly, then leaned lightly against the doorframe. Asterisk, you can stay as long as you like, she said, not loudly, not directed, but meant. The man looked up slightly, not surprised, just aware. He nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement, nothing more needed. And that was the way of things here. People did not ask what brought you. They did not ask what you were thinking. They did not try to fix what you had not yet explained. They simply allowed you to be, and somehow, that did more than any answer could. Further down the street, a bicycle rolled past slowly. A young boy, feet barely reaching the pedals, moving with careful determination. He wobbled once, then steadied himself, and continued on, no rush, no pressure, just forward. The town seemed to move like that too. Not perfectly, not all at once, but steadily, gently correcting itself without fuss. Miss Clara watched from the library doorway, the small movements of the morning unfolding, the man on the bench, the boy on the bicycle, the soft opening and closing of doors. All of it connected, not by purpose, but by presence. And somewhere in that, there was a quiet understanding that life did not need to be solved to be lived. It only needed to be noticed. The man on the bench leaned back again, his shoulders relaxing just slightly, the kind of shift that might go unseen by anyone else, but felt deeply within. His thoughts still there, but softer now, less demanding, less urgent, and for the first time, they did not feel like something he needed to answer, only something he could sit beside. The breeze passed again, this time a little warmer. The mist fully lifted now, leaving the town clear, open, uncomplicated. And as the morning continued, it became something simple, not empty, not uneventful, but free of the need to be anything more than it was. The clock ticked on. The bakery filled slowly, then emptied again. The library welcomed its first visitor, and the man on the bench, still there, still quiet, finally closed his eyes not to sleep, but to rest. Asterisk, just for a moment, just enough. There is a space that most people don't notice. Not because it is hidden, but because it is quiet. It lives between thoughts, between one worry and the next. A small pause, so brief it is often missed. And yet, if you happen to find it, even for a moment, it changes everything. That morning in the town, that space seemed a little wider than usual, as if something had gently stretched it open, making room, not for answers, but for rest. The man on the bench remained still, his eyes closed now. Not deeply asleep, not fully awake, just somewhere in between, and in that place, his thoughts had softened further, no longer lined up waiting for attention, no longer demanding to be solved. They drifted, like clouds that had forgotten where they were going. Across the street, the bakery had grown a little busier. The door opening and closing in quiet rhythm, the bell above it ringing softly each time. Never sharp, never interrupting, just marking movement. Mrs. Callahan moved through the space with the same steady calm, placing cups, handing over bread, offering small nods and gentle smiles. She did not hurry, even when there was more to do, because here there was always time, or perhaps more accurately, there was no need to race against it. At the library, Miss Clara had taken her place behind the desk, a book open before her, though she was not reading it, not fully. Her eyes moved across the page, but her attention drifted elsewhere, toward the open door, the soft light, the quiet presence of the town beyond it. A young girl stepped inside, holding a small stack of books close to her chest. She paused near the entrance, not unsure, just taking in the space. "Morning," Miss Clara said softly. The girl nodded, then walked slowly toward the desk. Not rushed, not hesitant, just present outside. Mr. Leland had begun his walk down Maple Street, his pace unhurried, his hands loosely at his sides. He passed the bench, noticing the man there, eyes closed. Still, he did not stop, but he did not look away quickly either. There was a quiet understanding in the glance, a recognition of something shared. Not a conversation, but a knowing that sometimes stillness is the only thing needed. The clock continued its gentle ticking, steady, unconcerned with who noticed or who didn't. It did not measure urgency, only passage, and even that it seemed to do lightly. A breeze moved through again, this time carrying warmth with it, the kind that settles into the skin without asking. And as it passed, the leaves shifted, not dramatically, just enough to remind the world that it was alive. At the bakery, a man sat by the window, a cup of coffee untouched before him. He stared out at the street, not focused on anything in particular, just watching, letting the view pass through him. The bench, the library, the slow movement of people, all of it simple, all of it enough. Back at the bench, the man opened his eyes slowly, not suddenly, not as if returning from somewhere else, but as if the moment had gently invited him back. He looked around, not searching, just noticing again, and something had changed. Not outside, but within the question he had carried. Still there, but quieter now. Less defined, less demanding, as if it had lost its urgency. And in doing so, had become something else. Not a problem, but a thought, one that could be held lightly, or even set down for a while, across the street. Mrs. Callahan caught his movement. She tilted her head slightly, then gave a small nod, not asking anything, not offering anything, just acknowledging, and that was enough. Further down the road, the boy on the bicycle returned, moving slower now. His earlier determination softened into ease. He coasted past the bench, glancing briefly at the man, then continued on, leaving behind the faint sound of wheels on pavement. The town continued its quiet unfolding, each moment connecting to the next, not tightly, not with purpose, but gently, like pages turning in a book no one was rushing to finish. Miss Clara watched as the girl at the desk placed her books down carefully, as if they mattered. And perhaps they did, in a place like this. Even small things were given their space, given their time, and that was the difference. Nothing here was pushed forward, nothing pulled back. Everything simply moved. At the pace it needed, the man on the bench stood slowly, not because he was finished, but because he no longer needed to stay. There was a lightness in the movement, a quiet release. He looked once more at the street, then turned and began to walk. No destination made clear, no urgency behind the steps. Just movement, just forward, and as he left the bench behind, it remained exactly as it had been, waiting, not for him, not for anyone in particular, just ready, for whoever might need it next, and somewhere, in the space between one thought and another, something had settled, not solved, not answered, but eased, and in this town, that was often more than enough. There are some things in life that stay with you, not because you hold on to them, but because they never asked to be held in the first place. They remain quietly, like a feeling you can't quite name, but recognize the moment it returns. That afternoon in the town carried that kind of presence. The morning had softened into something warmer now, the light resting gently across the buildings, stretching shadows just enough to remind you that time was moving, but not in any hurry, never in a hurry. The bench at Maple and Third stood as it always had, empty again, and yet not empty in the way people often think. It held something, not visibly, but in the quiet memory of being used, of having been a place where someone paused, where something loosened, where a moment was allowed to exist without interruption. Across the street, the bakery door opened once more. A small group stepped out together, their conversation light, unhurried, not pressing toward a conclusion, just moving as it needed to. Mrs. Callahan watched them go, her hands resting against the edge of the counter. There was a certain satisfaction in the way the day had unfolded so far, not because anything significant had happened, but because nothing had been forced, nothing had been pushed into meaning. It had simply been, and that was often enough. At the library, Miss Clara had moved a chair closer to the window, the book in her lap now open, but still only half read. She glanced outside every so often, not out of distraction, but out of quiet interest. The town was a kind of story too, one that did not need to be written, because it was always unfolding, always present. A man passed by the window slowly, his steps even, his gaze forward, not searching, not avoiding, just moving. Miss Clara followed his movement with her eyes for a moment, then returned to her book, though something of that motion stayed with her. The simple act of walking without urgency, without the need to arrive further down the street. Mr. Leland had stopped near the corner, not because he had reached a destination, but because something had caught his attention. A small patch of sunlight on the ground filtered through the leaves above. He stood there a moment, looking at it as if it were something worth noticing. And perhaps it was. In a place like this, even the smallest things were allowed their moment. The clock continued its quiet work. Tick, tick, tick. Not louder, not faster, just steady, as if reminding the town that time was still there. But not something to be chased. At the edge of the street, a child crouched near the curb, tracing shapes in the dust with a small stick. No pattern, no goal, just movement, just play. And as they traced and retraced the same lines, there was no concern for what it meant, or whether it mattered, only that it was happening, only that it was enough. Asterisk, the breeze returned again, warmer now, carrying with it the faint scent of something blooming nearby. It moved gently through the street, touching everything lightly, leaving nothing disturbed, just acknowledged. Back at the bakery, Mrs. Callahan stepped outside. She leaned against the doorway again. The afternoon settling around her, she looked toward the bench. Still empty, still waiting, and she thought, not in words, but in feeling, that someone else would sit there soon, not because it was needed, but because that is how things moved here. One quiet moment leading into another, not planned, not arranged, just allowed at the library. Miss Clara closed her book at last, not because she had finished it, but because it felt like the right moment to pause. She placed it gently beside her, then stood, moving slowly toward the door. As she stepped outside, the light met her softly. The air still warm, still calm. She looked down the street, taking in the small movements, the passing figures, the still places, the way everything existed without needing explanation. And she felt it again, that quiet understanding, that not everything needs to be understood to be felt, and not everything needs to be held to remain. The man who had been on the bench earlier walked again, now further down the street, his pace unchanged, his expression softer, not because anything had been solved, but because nothing needed to be, and that was the difference. The town did not take things away. It did not fix them. It simply gave them space, and in that space, they became lighter, easier to carry, or easier to set down. The afternoon stretched gently, not pulling toward evening, just leaning into it, as if the day itself was not in a hurry to end. The clock ticked on. The breeze moved again. The bench remained, and the town, quiet as ever, continued, not because it needed to, but because that is what it had always done. And somewhere within it all, without announcement, without effort, something stayed. Not held, not chased, just present, just enough. There is a quiet way that things sometimes settle. Asterisk, not with answers, not with decisions, but with a kind of understanding. The kind that does not need to be spoken, only felt. That afternoon had begun to lean gently toward evening, not in a way that pulled the day forward, but in a way that allowed it to soften. The light changed slowly, becoming warmer, more golden. Stretching across the street in long, quiet lines, the shadows followed, not chasing the light, just moving with it. As if they too understood there was no need to hurry. At the bench, someone had come to sit again, not the same man, not someone who had been watching earlier, just someone new, arriving in the same unannounced way. She sat gently, adjusting her coat around her, then resting her hands loosely in her lap. There was something in her posture, not tension, but weight, the kind that comes from holding on to thoughts for too long. And yet, here, that weight did not press as heavily. It rested differently across the street. Mrs. Callahan noticed her almost immediately, not because she was looking for someone, but because she always noticed when the bench was used. It was not curiosity. It was something quieter than that, a kind of awareness. She wiped her hands slowly on her apron and stepped just slightly closer to the doorway, not to approach, but to remain near in case presence was needed. Not words, just presence. At the library, Miss Clara returned inside, the door closing softly behind her. The room felt warmer now, not in temperature, but in tone. She moved toward the desk, pausing for a moment to straighten a small stack of books, each one aligned carefully, as if even small order could bring a kind of calm. A man entered quietly, nodding as he passed her. His footsteps soft against the floor. He did not speak, and she did not expect him to in this town. Silence was not something to be filled. It was something to be shared outside. Mr. Leland had taken a seat on the low stone wall near the corner, his hat resting loosely in his hands. He looked toward the street, then toward the sky, then back again, not searching for anything, just letting his gaze settle wherever it chose. There was a rhythm to the way people existed here, not coordinated, not planned, but somehow connected like pieces of a quiet pattern, each moving at their own pace and still belonging to the same moment. The clock continued its gentle ticking, steady as ever, a soft thread running through everything, holding the day together without effort. At the bench, the woman shifted slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction, her breathing slower now, more even, the thoughts she had carried, still present, but no longer pressing. They sat beside her now, not demanding attention, not asking to be solved, just there. And in that, there was relief across from her. A small dog wandered near the edge of the sidewalk, its leash trailing loosely behind. It paused near the bench, looking up briefly, then continued on, as if acknowledging her presence. Without needing anything more, the woman watched it go, a faint smile touching her expression, not because anything had changed, but because something had softened at the bakery. A man stepped out carrying a cup of coffee. He paused near the doorway, then chose not to leave immediately. Instead, he stood there, sipping slowly, looking out at the street as if he too had decided. There was no need to move just yet. Miss Clara glanced out the library window again, her eyes settling on the bench, on the woman seated there, still present, and she recognized something familiar in that stillness. Not the person, but the moment. She had seen it before, many times. The quiet shift that happens when someone stops trying to solve everything and simply allows things to be. It was never dramatic, never obvious, but it was real, and it mattered. The breeze moved again, softer now, carrying with it the early hints of evening. The air cooling just slightly, the light lowering at the stone wall. Mr. Leland stood slowly, brushing his hands together, not because they were dirty, but because the moment had passed, and it was time to move again. He walked without urgency, his steps steady, his path unspoken. Back at the bench, the woman took a deeper breath, then let it go slowly, as if releasing something. Not entirely, but enough to make space. She looked down the street, the long stretch of quiet movement, the slow rhythm of the town, and for the first time that day, she did not feel the need to follow it, or understand it, or keep up with it. She simply sat and let it be. The clock ticked on. The light softened further. The bakery quieted. The library dimmed slightly as shadows reached its doorway. And the town, as it always did, continued, not pulling anything with it, not leaving anything behind, just allowing everything to find its place in its own time, in its own way. And somewhere within that gentle unfolding, something had settled, not because it was finished, but because it no longer needed to be carried the same way. And that was enough. There are some thoughts that arrive quietly, not like questions, not even like worries, but like something unfinished, something that lingers. Without asking to be completed, that evening in the town had begun to settle in layers. Softly, without announcement, the sky shifted from pale gold to a muted blue, and then to something deeper, something that held the last light gently, as if it did not want to let it go too quickly. The streets grew quieter, not empty, just slower. The kind of quiet that feels full, not lacking at the bench. The woman remained a little longer, not because she needed to, but because leaving did not feel necessary yet. Her hands rested more loosely now. Her shoulders no longer held in that same careful way. The thoughts she carried earlier, still there, but changed, not solved, just quieter, like a conversation that no longer needs to continue. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan stepped outside once more, this time without her apron. She leaned lightly against the doorframe, watching the evening settle, not watching the woman, but aware of her, the way one is aware of a lamp still glowing in another room, comforting without needing attention. The bakery lights dimmed slightly. The last tray cleared. The bell above the door rang once more, softly, then rested at the library. Miss Clara moved through the aisles with slow, practiced steps, her fingers brushing lightly along the spines of books. Not searching, just passing, she paused near the window again, the glass reflecting the early night, and beyond it, the bench. Still occupied, she gave a small nod, not to anyone in particular, then turned back inside, as if acknowledging something that did not require words. Further down the street, a porch light flickered on, then another, each one small, but together, enough to change the tone of the evening, warmth appearing in quiet places. At the corner, Mr. Leland had returned home, his coat set aside, a cup of something warm in his hand. He stood near his window, looking out, not thinking about the day, not reviewing it, just letting it pass through him. The clock inside his home ticked in the same steady rhythm, unchanged, reliable, unconcerned with whether anything had been figured out. Back at the bench, the woman finally shifted forward slightly, as if considering standing, then paused, not out of hesitation, but simply because there was no need to rush that moment either. A car passed slowly, its headlights gentle, not bright enough to interrupt, just enough to mark movement. The sound faded quickly. Leaving the quiet behind, she looked down at her hands, then up again, and in that small motion, something became clear, not an answer, not a conclusion, but a simple understanding that not everything required one. Some things could remain open and still feel complete. She stood then, slowly, naturally, as if the moment had reached its end on its own, not pushed, not forced. She glanced once at the bench and toward the street, then began to walk, her steps steady, not heavy, not light, just steady, and in that steadiness, there was something new, not certainty, but ease, the kind that does not come from knowing, but from no longer needing to know. The bench remained empty now, but not unchanged. It held the quiet of the moment, the weight that had been set down there, and the lightness that followed, as if it remembered. Without needing to, across the street, Mrs. Callahan noticed the woman leave, and gave the smallest nod, not to her, but to the moment itself, then stepped back inside, the door closing softly behind her. The evening deepened, the sky darkened fully now, stars beginning to appear, not all at once, just a few. Then a few more. At the library, the lights dimmed, then went out, the building settling into stillness, holding its quiet stories inside, waiting for another day. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its sound low, familiar, not interrupting, just reminding. That movement continues, even when nothing feels urgent. In homes across the town, chairs were pulled closer, windows cracked open. Soft conversations faded into quiet, and the day, without announcement, without ceremony, came to rest. Not because everything had been resolved, but because it no longer needed to be. The clock continued, as it always had, marking time, without asking anything of it, And somewhere within that steady rhythm, there was a quiet permission to let things remain unfinished, to let questions stay open, to let thoughts drift, without holding them too tightly. And in that space, something softer took their place. Not answers, not solutions, just calm, the kind that settles slowly, the kind that stays without needing a reason. And as the town rested, as the night deepened, and the last sounds faded into stillness, there was nothing left to do, nothing left to figure out, only the quiet understanding that some things were never meant to be solved, and that was more than enough. There is a certain kind of quiet that does not arrive all at once. It gathers slowly, like evening light settling into the corners of a room, or like breath evening out after a long day. That night in the town, the quiet had deepened into something softer still. Not silence, asterisk, but a presence, a steady, gentle hush that held everything in place. The streets had grown still, not empty, just resting. The kind of stillness that does not feel lonely, only complete. The bench remained where it always had been, unchanged, and yet carrying something from the day. Not visible, not spoken, but felt. The air had cooled. The faint warmth of the day now replaced with a soft evening chill. Windows stood slightly open, curtains shifting just enough to show that the world was still breathing. Inside one of the houses near the corner, Amar Leland sat in his chair, a lamp beside him casting a small circle of light. He was not reading, not thinking in any particular direction, just sitting, his hands resting easily, his shoulders lowered. The clock on the wall continued its steady ticking, unbothered, each second arriving and leaving without pause, without urgency. And somewhere within that rhythm, there was a quiet kind of comfort across the street. Mrs. Callahan had finished tidying the last of the bakery. The counters clean, the chairs set neatly, the door locked. She paused for a moment before turning off the final light, looking at the room not as a place of work, but as something familiar, something steady. Then the light clicked off, and the space rested too. At the library, everything had gone still. Books settled into their shelves. Pages closed, stories paused. Not ended, just waiting, as Clara had left earlier. But her presence lingered in the quiet order of the place, the careful arrangement of things, the calm that did not need to be explained outside. A breeze moved gently through the trees, not strong enough to be heard clearly, just enough to shift a leaf here, a branch there. The kind of movement that reminds you the world is still awake, even when it feels asleep. The woman who had been sitting on the bench earlier had returned home, her shoes set by the door, a soft light on in the corner of the room. She moved more slowly now, not tired in the usual way, but settled. The thoughts she had carried, still there somewhere, but no longer at the surface, no longer asking to be held. She sat near the window, not looking out at anything in particular, just letting the quiet reach her, letting it settle where the noise had been. And in that space, there was no need to revisit anything, no need to sort or arrange, only a gentle awareness. that everything could remain as it was without needing to be changed. Elsewhere in the town, lights dimmed one by one, some quickly, some slowly, each one marking the end of another small part of the day. A door closed here, a chair shifted there, a final cup set down, the kinds of sounds that do not interrupt the quiet, but become part of it at the far edge of town. The train passed once more, its distant sound softer now, less like movement, more like memory, a reminder that not everything stops. Even when everything feels still, the night stretched gently. Not long, not short, just enough. The kind of night that does not press forward, does not pull back, simply remains. And in that remaining, there was space. Space for thoughts to rest, for questions to loosen, for the mind to step back without needing to be told. The bench stood quiet, empty, but not alone. It held the presence of the day without holding on to it, just as the town held its stories. Without needing to revisit them, the trees shifted once more. The breeze softer now, almost gone, and the air itself seemed to settle, as if even it had found a place to rest. In the woman's home, her breathing slowed, not intentionally, just naturally, as the body follows where the mind has already gone, toward quiet, toward stillness, toward rest. The clock ticked on, the night deepened, and nothing asked for attention anymore. Nothing needed to be solved. Nothing needed to be carried forward. Only this moment. This quiet, this gentle, steady ease. And as the town drifted further into rest, there was a soft understanding that even the thoughts that once felt heavy could become light if given enough space, enough quiet, enough time. And so the night continued, uninterrupted, unhurried, holding everything just as it was, and allowing it, at last, to rest. There comes a point in the night when even the quiet begins to soften, when the edges of things are no longer sharp, and everything starts to feel just a little farther away. Not distant, just lighter, as if the world itself is loosening its hold. That was the hour the town had quietly entered, without announcement, without anyone needing to notice. The kind of hour that does not belong to the day anymore, and not quite asleep yet. But somewhere gently in between, the streets were still, the lamps glowing softly, not bright, just enough to mark their place, their light resting on the pavement like something carefully set down. The bench remained beneath the tree, the leaves above it barely moving now, the air so calm it almost felt paused, as if even the breeze had decided to rest. In the houses along the street, the last small movements of the night were fading. A cup placed quietly in a sink, a window adjusted just slightly, a light dimmed, then another, each action softer than the last, until even those gentle sounds became part of the stillness. Inside her home, the woman had not moved much. She sat where she had settled, her body at ease, her mind no longer reaching outward, the thoughts that once circled, now drifting, not gone, but no longer gathering, like leaves on water that slowly begin to spread apart, no longer touching, no longer pulling against each other. Her breathing had found its own rhythm, slow, even unforced, the kind that happens when there is nothing left to hold and nothing left to resist across town. Mr. Leland had turned off his lamp, the room now resting in shadow. Only the faint outline of furniture visible, familiar shapes that needed no attention. The clock still ticking, but softer now. Or perhaps just less noticed, time continuing without asking to be followed. At the bakery, everything was dark, still, the warmth from the ovens long gone, leaving behind only the quiet presence of the space. Ready for another morning, but not yet, not now at the library. The shelves stood in silent rows, stories resting where they had been left, each one waiting without urgency, without expectation. Outside, the sky had deepened fully, stars more visible now, not bright, but steady, each one fixed in its place, as if reminding the night how to remain calm. The town itself seemed to breathe more slowly, not in any way you could measure, but in a way you could feel. A soft settling, a gentle release, as if everything had agreed, without saying so, to rest back in her chair. The woman's eyes had grown heavier, not suddenly, but gradually. The kind of heaviness that does not press, only invites. Her thoughts now moved differently, less like words, more like impressions, soft shapes of memory fading before they could fully form. Nothing staying long enough to matter, nothing clear enough to follow. And in that drifting, there was peace, because nothing needed to be held. Nothing needed to be finished. The mind, which had once reached for answers, now simply moved gently, without direction, without purpose, like clouds that do not know where they are going, and do not need to. The room around her seemed softer too, edges less defined, light dimmer. Even the air felt quieter, as if sound itself had grown tired. Across the street, a curtain shifted slightly, then stilled, a small motion, barely noticeable, and then gone. The bench outside remained empty, but not forgotten. It held the quiet of the night, just as it had held the thoughts of the day, without effort, without change. Simply present, the hours moved forward, though no one was counting, no one was watching. Time continued in its quiet way, unseen, unfelt, and in that absence of attention, it seemed to pass even more gently. The woman leaned back slightly, her body finding a more comfortable stillness, her hands resting where they had fallen, no longer adjusting, no longer aware of themselves. Her breathing deepened just a little, not by choice, but by ease, and her thoughts, if they could still be called thoughts, had begun to fade into something else, something softer, something less defined, a drifting, a quiet unfolding, where one moment blends into the next, without edges, without separation. And in that space, there was nothing left to follow, nothing left to question, only the gentle sense of being held, by the quiet, by the stillness, by the night itself. The town rested fully now. Every street, every home, every small corner, settled into the same calm, the same steady quiet. And within that shared stillness, there was a kind of unity, not noticed, not spoken, but felt, as if everything belonged to the same moment, The same breath, the same rest, and as the night carried on, there was no need to mark it, no need to follow it, because it was already carrying everything forward, gently, quietly, without asking anything in return. And somewhere within that softness, sleep was no longer something to reach for. It was simply something that was already arriving. One quiet moment at a time, there is a moment. Just before sleep fully arrives, when everything becomes softer than before. Not only the room, not only the night, but even the feeling of being awake. It does not happen suddenly. It happens in layers, slowly, gently, like the last light fading from the sky, until you are no longer sure exactly when it changed. That was where the night had now settled, a place between noticing and drifting. Between thinking and simply being, the town had grown so still. It no longer felt like something separate, but like a single quiet space, holding everything within it. The streets rested without movement. The lamps glowed without effort. The trees stood without sound. Even the air itself felt still, as if it too had settled into sleep inside her home. The woman no longer shifted at all, her body completely at rest, her hands still, her shoulders soft, her breath slow and deep, moving in a rhythm that required no attention. The thoughts that once moved through her mind had faded further, now only faint traces barely there, like distant echoes that no longer reach the surface, nothing forming clearly. Nothing asking to be understood, only a quiet drifting, a gentle floating between moments across the town. Mr. Leland had long since settled into sleep, his room dark, his breath steady, the clock still ticking on the wall, but no longer heard, no longer needed at the bakery. The silence was complete, no movement, no warmth, only the quiet promise of another morning. Resting somewhere ahead, at the library, the stillness had deepened. Even the idea of sound felt distant there. The shelves, the books, the air between them, all resting together, without motion, without interruption. Outside, the sky stretched wide and calm, stars steady, unchanging, not bright, not dim, just present. The kind of presence that does not ask to be seen, only to exist. The bench beneath the tree remained as it always had. But now it felt like part of the night itself, no longer separate, no longer holding anything from the day, only resting just as everything else was resting. In the woman's room, her head leaned slightly to one side, her breathing deeper now, slower, each breath flowing into the next, without pause, without effort. Her thoughts had softened beyond recognition. No longer words, no longer images, just a quiet space, a stillness within. That matched the stillness around her. And in that space, there was nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to return to. The mind, freed from its usual movement, simply rested, like water that has finally become still. No ripples, no disturbance, only calm. The town held that same calm. Every home, every street, every quiet corner, all part of the same gentle rest. No urgency, no expectation, only the steady presence of the night. Time continued, but it no longer felt like time. Moments did not pass, they blended, one into another, without edges, without measure, and within that blending there was ease. Because nothing needed to be tracked, nothing needed to be known, the woman drifted further, her awareness softening even more, as if gently stepping away, not leaving, just loosening, letting go of the need to notice, to think, to follow. Her breath continued, slow and steady, a quiet anchor, even as everything else faded, and then even that faded into the background, part of the stillness, part of the rest. Outside, the faintest movement of air passed through the trees, so soft it barely touched the leaves, and then it too was gone, leaving nothing behind but quiet, deep, complete, unbroken. The kind of quiet that does not feel empty, but full of rest, full of calm, full of the gentle certainty that nothing more is needed. And in that quiet, sleep was no longer approaching. It was already there, already holding everything, gently, without effort, without interruption. And the town and the woman and every small, quiet part of the night rested within it completely. There is no clear moment when night becomes sleep, no single breath that marks the change, no line that is crossed. It happens quietly, so quietly that it almost feels like nothing at all. And yet everything shifts softly, completely. That was where the town now rested, not in silence alone, but in something deeper, something that did not need to be named. The streets were still, the lights dim and steady, the trees unmoving, the air calm and settled, everything exactly as it needed to be, and nothing asking to be different. The bench beneath the tree stood as it always had, but now it was simply part of the quiet, no longer a place where anything happened, only a place that existed, just as the night existed, just as everything existed, without effort, without intention. Inside her home, the woman had drifted beyond thought, beyond noticing, beyond even the gentle awareness of the room around her, her breathing slow and even her body completely at rest. No tension, no movement, only stillness, the kind that does not need to be maintained, the kind that simply is. Her thoughts, once present, once searching, had dissolved, not solved, not answered, just gone quiet, like footsteps that fade into the distance, until they are no longer heard across the town. Every home had settled into the same deep rest. Lights out, curtains still, rooms quiet, the small sounds of the day long since faded, replaced by nothing, and that nothing was not empty. It was full of calm, full of peace, full of the quiet understanding that nothing more was needed. At the bakery, the ovens were cold, the counters clean, the space resting in the dark, waiting for morning, but not thinking of it, not anticipating it, only resting at the library. The books remained closed. Stories paused mid-thought, mid-sentence, mid-page, and even those unfinished lines felt complete, because they were allowed to rest. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly above, star-steady, unchanging, watching without watching, present without needing to be seen. The town, so full of small moments during the day, now held nothing at all. And yet, it held everything, because in that quiet, there was nothing missing, nothing waiting, nothing unresolved that needed attention. Only rest, only stillness, only the gentle presence of night. Time continued, but it no longer mattered. Moments passed, but they did not need to be counted. The clock ticked somewhere, but no one listened, no one followed, because everything had already arrived where it needed to be. The woman slept, not lightly, not restlessly, but deeply, fully, as if the quiet itself had carried her there, as if the night had simply gathered her into it, without effort, without resistance, and in that sleep there were no questions, no unfinished thoughts, no need to return to anything from before, only rest, only calm, only the soft unfolding of stillness. The bench outside remained, the trees above it, the streets around it, all part of the same quiet, all held within the same gentle stillness. Nothing moving, nothing needing to move. And as the night continued, there was no change to mark, no moment to notice, because everything had already softened, already settled, already faded into rest. And in that fading, there was something complete. Not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing needed to be. Some things were never meant to be solved. Some thoughts were never meant to be finished. Some moments were never meant to lead anywhere. They were simply meant to be felt and then gently released. And now, there was nothing left to hold, nothing left to follow, nothing left to do, only the quiet, only the stillness, only the deep, steady calm of sleep, and the town, and the night, and everything within it rested softly, completely, just as it was meant to. And now, there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to think about. Everything can rest exactly as it is. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts drift, and allow yourself to sink gently into sleep. You've done enough for today. Now it's time to rest. Good night, dear friend.